Hey, call the meeting to order. Need a motion to approve the agenda?
So approved, David.
Seconder,
Seconded, Kevin.
Second.
moved, seconded, question, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. We're in business. Conflict of interest, if any. Okay, so Brett and Mary Kay, you're on for the staff report for the reserve fund policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kelly, are you going to share the presentation? Just give Kelly a second to get that up. Perfect. Thanks, Kelly. So today we wanted to talk to you about revised operating and capital reserve fund policy. So why do we need an updated reserve fund policy? Well, first of all, it is past due. Our last reserve fund policy was updated in 2018. It was scheduled for a review to occur in 2023. Obviously, you know what happened in 2023 with local government reform and all the changes to the RSC. That just was not possible. So we finally had some time to look at this, and we felt it was a good time to bring it to your attention to begin that process. Since the last fund policy, our operations have changed significantly. We do have our 6 new service lines of business, and we've seen changes to both planning and development as well as solid waste. The costs have risen substantially. We've lived through the effects of inflation, and that's had an impact, especially on the solid waste facility when it comes to capital costs, and that really needs to be factored into a revised policy. And the timing is just perfect for us to set the stage with regard to the 2026 budget, because we really need to consider some of the factors that are going to be impacting the commission in the years to come. So the importance of reserves, and I can't overemphasize how important having adequately funded reserves are. This reserve fund policy is one of the most significant decisions that the board will make. It will have a lasting impact for years to come. It supports long-term planning and sustainability. It puts us in a strong position, and we were fortunate with our previous boards that they did see the importance of planning ahead and having adequately funded reserves. It also reduces the risk of service disruptions. This has happened in the past, and it will happen in the future, and it sets us up for success when it does occur. And the key to stable and predictable fee structure is having these adequately funded reserves. Having a stable and predictable fee structure is what the board has told us they want. It's what staff wants to see. And ultimately, it is what the taxpayer wants and needs. So timing with regard to a reserve fund policy. We understand that we need time and thoughtful evaluation with regard to such an important decision. We request that the Finance Committee and the board provide input in coming up with a proper reserve fund policy. We want to prioritize careful evaluation before actually adopting this policy, but we wanted to bring it forward now to advise the board of factors to consider during the 2026 budget process. So for this reason, our staff recommendation with respect to the reserve fund policy is to forward it on to the board for information purposes at this time only. You might want to jump to the next slide, Kelly. This is going to provide the board with context for informed budget decisions. It's also going to allow sufficient time to review and offer feedback because we're not rushing to adopt a policy. And then ultimately, we can return to the policy discussion once the budget process is complete. So we're just getting information out there right now. Then we're going to request feedback. And ultimately, we would love to see an updated reserve fund policy by the end of fiscal 2025. So our current policy, which was included in the Finance Committee package that you received, it met our past objectives, but it does fall short of our future requirements for a commission. It does not include the services, as we talked about, that were added in 2023. It's insufficient given the current cost that we are seeing and the projected needs in the future. And it was very simple and concise. So with regard to a new policy, we want to build on the Commission's commitment to strong fiscal responsibility. We want it to be guided by a comprehensive review of capital assets to plan for current and future needs, which is what we've done. And it's going to be broader in scope. So it's going to be a much more comprehensive policy than what is currently in place. So we're going to start with the operating reserves. And I know you're all familiar with the difference between capital and operating reserves, but if you refer to the policy, the draft policy that was sent out, the definition of an operating reserve fund is funds that are set aside to cover short-term fluctuations in revenues or unforeseen expenditures associated with the day-to-day operations of the Commission. Operating reserve funds are intended to ensure continuity of services in times of financial difficulty or unexpected financial needs. And that's really just a good summary. Each service that we provide needs to have its own reserve fund. And that's because you can't use funds from one service to fund another service. So we are targeting in this reserve fund policy to have balances of between 5% and 15% of budgeted revenue. And what that will really do is allow us to have sufficient funds set aside for approximately 1 month's worth of operating expenditures. So you can see here all the different funds that we have. For the first four, we're targeting a percentage of revenue of 10%. For tourism promotion, economic development, 5%. And then for community development, 10% as well. Regional transportation, public safety, and sport recreation, 15%. And you can see what that dollar amounts to. If you go to the next slide, Kelly, this gives you an idea of the current operating reserve funds that we have in place already. And then ones that currently have nothing, which is tourism promotion, economic development, public safety, and sport recreation and cultural infrastructure. So you can see we really have a good base to build on for many of our operating reserves. It's just taking the next step to establish balances for funds that currently don't have anything. And then with regard to solid waste is getting that up to be 10% of the solid waste budget. So for capital reserves, and again, I'm going to read the definition that we've included in the draft policy for you. Those are funds used to accumulate resources for long-term capital expenditures, such as the acquisition, construction, or betterment of capital assets, including buildings, infrastructure, and equipment. So anything that's capital in nature, the capital reserve fund can be used to pay for. And it is critical to the success of the organization. When we talk about some of those reasons, we'll go through specifically with regard to solid waste. So local planning services, just given the nature of the operations, it's less capital intense. You can think of things like computers, software, desks. Those are the kind of capital expenditures that exist there. So it doesn't need a significant amount in a capital reserve. So we've targeted 15,000 with regard to local planning. The vast majority of our capital expenditures are in solid waste services. It is very capital intensive. So the targeted dollar amount in this policy is 9.6 million. And we're going to take a deeper dive into that number in subsequent slides to inform you as to how we arrived at that figure. And then the last capital reserve fund balance would be for power generation facility. And that's a balance of 1.5 million, which would be the target. So it's approximately $750,000 right now to refit an engine. And we have 2 engines at that facility. So a target of 1.5 million would allow us to be able to refit those engines without actually having to borrow for the cost, which would save time as well as interest with regard to that fund. The other services that we offer are not capital in nature, so no capital reserve funds are needed for those. The next slide shows you where we are with regard to our current levels of funding. So we have a very good base on which to start. Local planning services, about 56% funded. Solid waste services has a balance of 3.6 million in it currently. But you may recall in the 2025 budget, we had budgeted 625,000 to go into capital reserves from that budget because we were in the position to have a large second previous year surplus. So by the end of 2025, if everything follows according to plan, we should have about $4.2 million in our solid waste services capital reserve fund. And then for power generation, we have a current balance of just under 880,000, or about 59% funded. So I'm very happy with the starting point where we start with regard to the capital reserves. And I think we can build on those as we go forward. So as I mentioned, let's take a little bit deeper dive into the solid waste capital reserve requirement. Obviously that $9.6 million, we understand it's a large figure. But when looking at it, we really felt like that was the number that was necessary to position us to be solid financially as we go into our 2030s, which is going to be very capital intensive. So why do we need a large capital reserve with regard to solid waste? The first thing is for critical infrastructure, or when failures happen. And I want to give you a real life example. In 2012, we had a failure in our leachate system. When that system fails, it's thousands of dollars per day to truck leachate off of the facility. If we don't have reserve funds to pay for the critical piece of infrastructure at that time, it means we have to borrow. And borrowing, as you are aware, is a process with the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board. And it takes a minimum of 2 months in order to get that approval. And you are not allowed to begin your project until that approval is in place. So if we did not have funds at that time to pay for the leachate system upgrade, we would have been in a position to probably have to pay thousands of dollars per day for a 3 to 4 month process in order to just get that system back up and running. We were fortunate that within a few days we could turn around and begin the process of upgrading the necessary infrastructure for the leachate system to get it operational as fast as possible because we had the funds on hand in the capital reserve fund. So it minimizes both risk as well as financial impacts by having balances in our capital reserve fund. The next thing that's going to impact the capital reserve for solid waste is our future cell development costs. So we are fortunate because we did get approval through our EIA to build on top of current cells. So current cell construction is piggybacking on existing cells. And that means that costs are much lower than if we had to develop cells on their own. So the estimated cost right now of developing a cell that are piggybacking on top of those existing cells is about $250,000 per cell. When we have reached the limit and we're not able to go any higher, the cells that are constructed, which begin to start in the early 2030s, those are estimated to cost between $1.2 million and $3 million per cell. Now, that's not every year, it's approximately every 2 years. But over that 10-year time frame, it's about $10 million in cell development that's going to be necessary to complete those cells. And the reason Brett can talk about that if you want more information, but there's a lot of, what's the word, Brett? Excavation that's required. There we go. So it's a lot more work to develop those cells. And one of the major reasons that we do have the balance in our solid waste capital reserve fund that we do today is we were preparing for this situation before the EIA was approved. So the EIA was approved in 2021, but when we didn't know if that was going to go through, we were starting to put funds aside so that we had adequately funded reserve funds to be able to draw on when development of those cells occurred. And then the last thing that would impact the balance is facility upgrades. As you can appreciate, we are a 40-year-old facility and it's an industrial facility. So some of those buildings and the infrastructure are starting to show their age, and they're going to require upgrades in the next 5 to 10 years. So the next slide Brett undertook a complete review of the capital asset condition and the estimated replacement through 2056, which is the estimated life of the landfill. So this really gives you a picture of where the landfill assets are in regards to their useful life. So if you look at it here, the dark red, 12% of our assets have currently exceeded the estimated useful life. 6% are between 80 and 100%. 21% are between 60 and 80. And then you can see the yellow is 40 to 60, and then our newer assets are in green. So about 39% of our assets are past 60% of their useful life. And included in that 21% of the 60 to 80 is our larger assets for our Baylor building, as well as our administration building. So their time is coming up. We know in the next 10 years that major infrastructure is going to be needed with regard to those two facilities. So we can't consider a reserve fund policy without factoring in the impacts on our borrowing, because the two go hand in hand. So traditionally, we have financed equipment purchases over 100,000. If the equipment was under 100,000, we sought to pay for it through operations or our tipping fee. But if it was over 100,000, we typically would finance for a period of 5 years, depending on the asset. In the early 2030s, we know that we will not have capacity to borrow for 100% of our infrastructure upgrades, as well as our equipment replacement, while maintaining our debt service ratio of less than 15%, which is what is in our debt management policy. We know in approximately 2031 that there's about $12 million worth of infrastructure upgrades and capital replacement that are necessary. And in order to be in a position to maintain that debt service ratio of 15%, we have to be in a position to fund about half of that in some other way. So the two ways that we could fund it is from tipping fee or from reserve funds. If we were to wait and not plan and just say, okay, in 2031, we're going to raise the tipping fee to come up with this $6 million, it's about a $70 increase on the tipping fee in that 1 year. Or we could take the other approach and say, okay, let's raise this money over the next 5 years so that we're in a position to have that fund, the money in the reserve funds in 2031, so we can then draw on them, borrow for the remainder, and not have to raise the tipping fee in such a significant way at that one point in time. So what does this all mean? We really have a 5-year window of lower cell costs, which provides time to plan for future cost spikes. This begins in 2026 as part of that 5-year window. And if you don't take anything else away from this presentation today, I think this is the key, there you go. This is the key statement that I would make. Strategic preparation today promotes stable and predictable tipping fees in the future. It reduces the likelihood of steep future tipping fee hikes and ultimately taxpayer dissatisfaction. So the need to begin preparing is now, and not to delay it until we actually need the funds if we're going to prevent those steep fee increases. That is always our goal. So what does the funding timeline for the reserve funds look like? I want to reiterate that our financial position is solid. Our current reserve fund balances are a great starting point on which to build, and the need is not immediate. There's no crisis. We have this 5-year window, especially when it comes to solid waste, to start taking action, and with the goal ultimately being to have fully funded reserve funds by the end of 2030 to put us in the financial position that we need. So with that, I would love to take, and other staff will help with this as well, any questions, comments you may have. So we're just looking for feedback at this point. We'd love to know how you feel about forwarding this on to the board, so they can have the same information as you do, so we can all be on the same page when we come to the 2026 budget.
Okay, so would anyone like to start off the questions?
Yeah, I'll jump in first.
Hey, Tim.
I mean, you've got a proposed policy and forecasted what you want for reserves. Have you gone to the step of forecasting what impact that is on each of the members in the region?
We've not taken the step of actually costing it out to the members. We wanted to get feedback before then to see if we're in the right ballpark and everybody is accepting of that. And then that would be the next step that we could say, okay, how are we going to get there? So a 5-year plan, if everybody's on board with a 5-year plan, this is how we get to have fully funded reserve funds over 5 years. And then ultimately, this is what it would cost per member.
And on this, to be clear on that, on the solid waste side, we're talking tipping fees.
Yes,
On the,
we can estimate what the impact would be on the tipping fee and then ultimately per member based on their tonnage.
okay. Any other questions?
I would kind of like to piggyback on what Director Fox mentioned, until we can actually see what those numbers look like and how they're going to impact us individually. It's kind of tough to say without having a full appreciation of this is going to impact us to this dollar value.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so Mary Kay, it is possible to continue and build up these reserves without having an impact other than just slight from year to year. Is that not true?
I'm not going to make any promises with regard to what the increase would be. That's going to be part of our budget process as we start developing. So when we do I'll take solid waste, for example, because it's the most capital intensive. When we do an annual budget, we project out over 5 years and say, okay, if we do this with the tipping fee this year, this is going to be the impact for the next 5 years. So as part of the budget process, we will have a better idea as to what tipping fee is going to be. If driven by this policy, if you guys think like, yes, this is something that we could consider, we would put that impact into a 5-year projection so that we would have an idea of where the tipping fee would be.
But we have 600,000 from 2025 to add to this, right?
Yes.
And I don't think we had a tipping fee increase, did we, in 2025, or was it? No.
We did not, but we were in the fortunate position in 2025 that our second previous year surplus was over $1 million. It's not going to be that coming into 2026. So we've got to balance that impact out as well.
Okay, so my reasoning for asking this then is if we had a tipping fee, which is, well, $2 is 2% or less, $3 is 3%. So that's quite minimal on today's standards. And that would drive the reserve for those years at between 600 and I don't know plus without doing the budget. But to me it doesn't seem like this is a huge impact year to year unless something goes sideways. Is that true? I know you have to do the budget.
And Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yes. Go ahead, Don.
So Mary Kay's reluctance to answer your question is exactly what you want in a chief financial officer. They don't make promises where there's any amount of uncertainty. But I think it is fair to say, Director Duplessis, that you're on the right track. Smoothing this out over time will minimize whatever the effect will be. There will be operational impacts that impacts to that strategy, both positive and negative. But this plan is partially it's built on trying to minimize the impact on communities and ultimately their ratepayers.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So I'd like to go back and just kind of take a look at some of Mary Kay's initial statements and understanding that this business is much different than our other business line. We're going to pay the bills to operate the solid waste operation no matter what. We're the ones that are paying. We're either going to put the money in the bank and put some away to help keep things stabilized over time, or we're going to pay a high increase down the road when the bills have to be paid then. So this is working out the right business case to continue the reasonable fee structure in the operation of the solid waste. So I think we always have to keep the two separated, because if the cost of operating the landfill goes up by 85% in 5 years, we have to pay an 85% increase in fees. All of us are required to use the landfill. That's in the act. We own it. So it's quite different, I think, than when we get to our operating reserve discussion. We may have a different type of discussion.
If I could, Mr. Chair, that's a great point. The other thing that we will just point out that 40% of our tonnage is from municipal, the other 60% is from the industrial, commercial, residential. So they would be covering 60% of the costs as well.
Okay. So any further questions on the solid waste piece on the capital side before we move forward? Mayor Kate or Director Kate, I see you there. Did you have any questions?
Fine.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Back to you, Mary Kay.
Okay. So is everybody on board that we would go through a similar presentation with regard to the board, just to keep them in the loop and allow them to provide some of their feedback as we move forward the policy? Okay. All right. The next presentation, Kelly, will give you the budget timeline and what we're looking at for proposed meetings for 2026 budget.
I still wouldn't mind seeing what impact that would mean even if you used the 2025 numbers to see what impact that would be. Had we started it a year ago, let's say, I wouldn't mind seeing that as part of your presentation.
For Tuesday?
I think you're gonna have people asking for it anyway, so.
I'm not sure it's possible to have that information to be available for Tuesday. I can try. What I would recommend is maybe give this information to the board with the caveat that we are undertaking to see what the projection looks like for each of the members if this policy were ultimately adopted.
Yeah, either way, I guess it'd be, but I have a funny feeling you're gonna get that question, so.
I appreciate that, and I will undertake to be as prepared as possible. We'll go from there.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I just add to Mary Kay's comment. Director Fox, typically when we develop our really to do that accurately, we'd have to go through the budget process itself and review it. And typically, Mary Kay, as efficient as she is, it's about a month to pull those numbers together. So we can certainly try to get those to you as quickly as possible, but I would expect it'll probably be in a month or so before we're able to get those calculations completed.
Yeah, thanks, Brett.
Further,
You're welcome.
we can move on.
Okay, Kelly, would you be able to share the next presentation? Is Kelly here?
I think we might have lost Kelly.
Okay, let me see if I have permissions to share.
And if we lost Kelly, we're all just wandering around in cyberspace somewhere. So
Well, I say that, Mr. Chair. I noticed while Mary Kay was speaking that it flashed on my screen that you are now the host.
Oh, okay. Well,
So I'm not sure what the implications are of that.
okay, I'm going to see if I have sharing permissions. I'm not sure if I do. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So this is a proposed budget timeline for our 2026 budget. So I've laid out the calendars for August, September, and October. So we have started the budget from a staff point of view. So May, June, July is really when we undertake to bring all the moving parts together and develop a budget from a staff point of view. And then with the goal of presenting something to the Finance Committee for mid-August. So this is the calendar for August. And what we're proposing is the first Finance Committee could take place on Thursday, August 14th, with the second Finance Committee taking place the 21st of August. So that would give the Finance Committee time to review the budget, provide any impacts that they would like to see. And then we would go to Committee of the Whole, with the whole board being involved in the budget development process. And we're probably going to be taking more time on the 28th. We're thinking maybe a whole afternoon with the board to go through the entirety of the budget, get their feedback. And then if we go on to September 4th would be another Committee of the Whole meeting with the board to ultimately see what needs to be updated, any impact that they may like to see, financial or otherwise. And then ultimately, our presentation of the proposed budget to the board would take place on Thursday, September the 11th. If the board agrees to forward the budget to the various municipalities at that time, we would meet with the CAOs to present the budget like we always do on September the 15th. And then amendments for the budget, if there were any proposed amendments, would have to occur by September 20th. That gives us 30 days from then until when the budget vote actually takes place in October. So the budget has to be out to the various member municipalities for 45 days before it can be voted on. So the earliest that the budget could be voted on would be October 27th. So somewhere in that week, I think usually it's a Thursday meeting, but it could be changed. Anywhere in that week would be the ultimate vote on the budget, because by November 1st, we are required to have the budget out to the member municipalities as well as the province so that it can be used in your budgets as you develop them for 2026. So if anybody has any feedback or questions with regard to this timeline, I'm happy to go back to the specific month or answer any of those for you.
Any questions? By the way, John, I just spoke to John. He and Kelly are trying to rejoin us. They lost internet connection in the building when they were working. I told them we were working away and they're going to try and join us by phone maybe. So someone has to say, admit John. Can I do that? I did. Yeah. Mary Kay, I wonder if it would be wise to send out announcements of those meetings, so we could all have our calendars set.
That's a great point. If everybody's in agreement with regard to this kind of set meeting schedule, we could ask Kelly to send those out for you.
Then we can click on them and at least they're popping up in our calendars and as we're going along. So
yeah, we just wanted to make sure that seems like enough meetings. It's not too many. I know it's a lot of meetings, but not too many. So if everybody's happy with that, we'd be happy to send out meeting requests.
Mr. Chair, as one of the privileges of your position is to call meetings of the Finance Committee, and so if you nod your head, that pretty much sets the schedule.
I can do that, yes. But the thing is, I guess if there were any big issues that were facing anyone for one day or the other or something, that could be it. But we've committed to doing this in our process, so and they're not all our timelines, they belong to others. So I'm happy to have us set that schedule the way it is. And if there are major issues, then someone will have to communicate with us and let us know, and we'll make any decisions we have to at that time. But I'd say let's set the schedule as you have it outlined for the committee. I don't get to do the board schedule.
Perfect. We'll undertake that. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions about that? No? Then we can continue to move along then.
At this point, Mr. Chair, the next thing on the agenda is a general discussion and direction to staff.
Okay, excuse me, I had more. Yeah, I was into, yeah, okay. So so any other questions? Comments? There may be some concerns there, but that's our business, I guess, is to always be a
Mr.
little concerned.
Mr. Chair, through you to Mary Kay, is there RSF funding this year also?
Yes, thank you for that question. There is RSSF funding that will be applied to the 2026 budget, probably similar to the amounts that are for 2025's budget.
Similar to 2025?
Yes,
Okay.
we have some past funding that we have not fully utilized. So we will be able to use the full 50%. So remember, we have to pay for 50% of the cost. I think that will be the cap on what we're able to actually use in our SSF funding for 2026 budget.
Okay.
Provinces put more money into RSF funding, but it's at 50% caveat.
Exactly. Yes, Director Corey, or Mr. Chair, you're absolutely right.
I'm going to make a bold statement here. And the last time the RSSF funding, some went to planning for us smaller municipalities, correct?
Yes.
I'm not sure that's completely fair to Fredericton, Oromocto, and New Maryland. And I know it's been controversy over the budget. I just wonder if we should put that RSSF funding toward the other lines rather than into the local planning.
I understand that position, and I think that's a great point. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
So at this point, this is a new item. It's not on the agenda, and it isn't reflected in the agenda. So I don't mind us having this discussion in another meeting, but I don't think that we want to step into it because we don't have all of the information that we may need to make a recommendation to the board. So
Fine.
we will certainly make sure that it's on the agenda of the next finance committee meeting for discussion as we go into the budget process. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Director Kate?
Yeah, just want to be clear though that it gets captured in the minutes. I thank Director Duplessis for raising it, but raising the point. So it will, even because we're in general discussion, these items that are discussed at this point do get captured in the minutes. Is that correct? And then the recommendation that be brought forward is captured in the minute? We
can do that, yes.
Thank
we'll make
you.
sure that happens. It's just that I usually try to be very explicit about when we approve. This does this when we approve the agenda, but this does say general discussion. So I guess it kind of opens the door widely sometimes. So But
Kind of what I was thinking, I guess, when it was general, but
yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Anyway.
you had the, fair enough. Just,
I think it fits, but I think it's a good point that we bring it forward when we also have some more, just information to have a more fulsome discussion. But I just wouldn't want it to get lost, so I'm glad it's being captured in the minutes. Thank
we
you.
will ensure that it doesn't. That we doesn't take much from me except to remember, so. Okay. Any additional concerns? I guess we have the next item would be moved to adjournment.
So moved.
Seconder,
Seconded.
all in favor?
Alright,
Aye.
We're out of business. Thank you all for your time.
have a good day.
Okay,
everyone.
Thank you,
Brett,
everyone.
John, Kelly, thank you for your time. Don, thank you for continuing to the last moment.
He's already
Bye,
off
Dan.
to something else.
There you go.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.